I am Professor Asuncion Magsino from the University of Asia and the Pacific in the Philippines, and I will share with you something that I have written about that was published in a book entitled Mind and Matter: Challenges and Opportunities in Cognitive Semiotics and Aesthetics, which came out early this year, 2022. I hope that you will find my short presentation on body-self synechism worth your time and attention. A quick run over the topics of the presentations in this webinar gives me the impression that maybe only a few would have some philosophical background. However, this presentation is philosophical in nature. I will then try to make this presentation as minimally technical as possible. Let me begin by stating the problem I intend to address, and that is, can the material body interact with an immaterial self? How can the body be linked to consciousness and ultimately to an autonomous self? After René Descartes introduced the doctrine that separates the mind and the body as two distinct substances, philosophy has for centuries been battling with how to regard the human body. Jonathan Westphal of the University College Oxford illustrates the mind-body problem in this way. In an article he wrote, "For example, I can open my eyes in the morning and see a cup of coffee waiting for me on the bedside table. There it is, a foot away, and I am not touching it. Yet somehow it is making itself manifest to me. How does it happen that I see it? How does the visual system convey to my awareness or mind the image of the cup of coffee?" The answer is not particularly simple. Very roughly, the physical story is that light enters my eyes from the cup of coffee, and this light impinges on the two retinas at the back of my eyes. Then, as we have learned from physiological science, the two retinas send electrical signals past the optic chiasm down the optic nerve. These signals are conveyed to the so-called visual cortex at the back of the brain. And then there is a sort of a miracle. The visual cortex becomes active and I see the cup of coffee. I am conscious of the cup, we might even say, though it is not clear what it means and how it differs from saying I see the cup. 1 minute, there are just neurons firing away and no image of cup of coffee. The next, there it is. I see the cup of coffee a foot away. How does my neurons contact me, or my mind, or consciousness, and stamp there the image of the cup of coffee for me? It's a mystery. That mystery is the mind-body problem. Our mind-body problem is not just the difficulty about how the mind and the body are related and how they affect one another. It is also a difficulty about how they can be related and how they can affect one another. Their characteristic properties are very different, like oil and water, which simply won't mix given what they are. The difficulty is not merely that mind and body are different. It is that they are different in such a way that their interaction is made impossible. The Cartesian split resulted in an obvious dilemma. Shall the body be considered as merely a part of the human being, or does it define what the human being is completely? Countless studies on the mind-body problem have been trying to resolve the issue. Can a non-material self emanate from a purely material body? This seemingly speculative or theoretical question has spawned divisiveness and fragmentation that we find at the root of contemporary culture, plagued with uncertainty, confusion, and ultimately anxiety that have a major impact on people's mental health. Unknown to many that by the end of the 19th century, Charles Sanders Peirce had already proposed a counter-argument to the chasm created by the Cartesian duality. He introduced the doctrine of synechism. Synechism is a name from the Greek synekimos, which is also from synekes, meaning continuous. This doctrine is fundamental in Peirce's metaphysics, which holds, I quote, that all that exists is continuous, end of quote. And as a corollary, quote, the view that consciousness has a bodily and social dimension, the latter originating outside the individual self, end of quote. Establishing this continuity is fundamental to the proposition that the doctrine of synechism is crucial to reversing the cultural effects of the Cartesian split. Seeing philosophy in the dialogue with the different branches of the sciences has been foretold by Peirce at the beginning of the 20th century. His theory of knowledge had its applicability to the sciences foremost in mind. He had even given this field prime importance because, in his words, and I quote, "The more a man is educated in other branches, but not trained in philosophy, the more certain it is that 2/3 of his stock or half-conscious philosophical opinions will be utterly wrong, and will completely blind him to the truth, which he will gradually become unable so much as to conceive." End of quote. This quasi-prophetic adage came to fulfillment within the same century when several men from various fields were unknowingly working simultaneously at various independent lines of inquiry into the problems of information processing, intercellular communications, behavioral psychology, neurobiology, and animal ecology. Biosemiotics is a fairly recent research area that began an attempt to revive the dialogue across the life sciences and the humanities as well, regarding what terms like meaning and significance might be in the context of living, complex, adaptive systems. As an upcoming field, biosemiotics defines its domain as the study of science, communication, and information in living organisms. Biosemiotics is an interdisciplinary research agenda investigating the myriad forms of communication and signification found in and between living systems. It is the study of representation, meaning, sense, and the biological significance of codes and sign processes. The scope of inquiry in biosemiotics spans from the genetic code sequences to intercellular signaling processes to animal display behavior up to human semiotic artifacts such as language and abstract symbolic thought. Biosemiotics aims to extend the notion and principles of general semiotics to apply to all life processes in the biosphere. In the realm of science, Peirce's concept of synechism may be appreciated as illustrated in the diagram. For Peirce, a sign is triadic in nature. In it bears the object and it determines the interpretant, providing a guide to the meaning-making task of the interpreting mind. Depending on whether the sign is an icon, an index, or a symbol, the interpretant elicited contributes to a specific realm of communication, and eventually branching out to broader social or cultural realms. As the diagram illustrates, synechism or continuity is created as an interpretant may serve as the object of another sign. Peirce provides 3 categories of how signs interact or are experienced by its receiver. The categories are simply named as firstness, secondness, and thirdness. As this diagram shows, the categories can also provide an explanation to support synechism. Let me first give a simple explanation to these categories. Firstness has to do with an initial contact with a sign. In this example, the contact between the pathogen and the lymphocyte would fall under the category of firstness. This initial contact leads to the lymphocyte's recognition of the pathogen as something that does not belong to the body, creating a situation of strife. This clash of 2 entities, tantamount to a differentiation of a self and a non-self, describes the category of secondness. This situation signals indexical processes, and in this case, the production of antibodies, which creates an environment that becomes hostile to the pathogen. This describes the category of thirdness. Adopting the triadic scheme of Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotics, Thomas Sebeok formulated a theory on modeling systems that has been used in biosemiotic. He distinguishes three distinct modeling systems that are generated as a consequence of a system's capacity to organize semiotic relationships and formalize models to aid in recognizing patterns in things as well as transmitting messages. This can be broadly taken as communication models. Modeling, in a broad sense, is a product of semiosis. He designates the three as a primary modeling system, or PMS, a secondary modeling system, or SMS, and a tertiary modeling system, or TMS. In this diagram, we see how these three modeling systems are synergistic as well. The primary modeling system, or PMS, allows communication through the modeling of iconic and indexical signs by a quasi-mind. This may be considered as an original or primitive language. The language of the body can be considered as exemplifying a primary modeling system. Hence, it is proper to talk about a language of the body in a strict and not figurative sense. I'll present here video clips of individuals creating a secondary modeling system of what they perceive their bodies communicate to them. They translate the language of the body into their own language. These are very familiar scenes during a patient's consultation with a doctor.
Just said it was happening in my chest.
And the light is bothering me a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd say specifically it was in the center of my chest.
I see.
But then it did kind of move.
Okay.
Went down my arm a bit and up my neck as well.
Okay.
It felt like someone was sitting in my chest really. It felt like a pressure being put on my chest.
I see.
It's kind of all over.
Okay.
But it also, I got this shooting pain down my neck, and my neck is very stiff.
Okay.
But it's not. It's the entire head.
On a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the worst pain you felt, where would you put it on that scale?
Quite high, 8 or a 9.
So if you had to rate on a pain scale, 0 being no pain, 10 being the worst pain you ever
Oh,
had.
it's a 10.
A 10?
I've never had a headache like this.
Okay.
Finally, specialists convert the language of the body and the patient's non-technical language into a more sophisticated language. They use tertiary modeling systems. This is an excerpt from a YouTube uploaded in Dr. Mike's channel that exemplifies a tertiary modeling
that happened.
I was catching her weight.
Oh, I see what happened. Okay, so there's potential for a meniscus injury there as well as an MCL injury. At that moment, if you have a tear of that ligament, you're just gonna get so much swelling and bruising. He's gonna get an x-ray to make sure that no bones are broken. He's gonna get some crutches. He's gonna get follow-up, get an MRI, find out that the medial meniscus and the MCL are torn, potentially either do rehab and or surgery, and we'll be back on his feet dancing his little heart away.
So now we have enough tools to navigate the question: can an autonomous mind connect with the world out there? We have shown instances where the mind creates secondary modeling systems of realities that it is a receiver of. We are talking of the experience of firstness and secondness. I'm no expert in this field, but my study seems to point me to the mirror neurons as being responsible for this phenomenon. Mirror neurons located proximate to the Broca's area have long been associated with motor control and language use. It is believed to biosemiotically affect the emergence of a hypostatically abstracted pre-linguistic representations of self and the other. These mirror neurons allow individuals to exhibit iconic motor neural patterns as one executes and the other observes and replicates through execution actions or behavior like in mimicry. This somehow substantiates a common belief that all individuals are equipped with some automatic observation, execution, mirroring mechanisms in the brain that gives rise to a mimetic, that is, iconic interpretation done in observation and execution of something belonging to an external realm. What happens in mimicry is the formation of a habit, thirdness, that assumes the distinction between the self and the other, secondness, as the subject replicates iconically something it observes, firstness. Closer scrutiny of this mimetic capacity discloses a highly significant negative variance in the activation of mirror neurons when presented with indexical or symbolic behavioral patterns. From this difference, it can be conjectured that semiotic objects do not set off neural sign exchanges in the same manner as they are perceived differently. But the capacity of the mind for iconic indexical signs that pervade the categories of firstness and secondness would hardly explain the emergence of its symbolic capacity and the creation of a world of thirdness. I think that Penrose Hameroff's theory of quantum consciousness is worth exploring for this purpose. Applying quantum vibrational computations to brain functions implies a non-algorithmic process which is neither deterministic nor random, a property which Penrose also attributes to conscious thought and understanding. This clue suggests that quantum computation with objective reduction may be somehow involved in consciousness. Furthermore, in the Penrose-Hameroff theory of quantum consciousness, it is hypothesized that the way the microtubules are structured, that is following a fractal pattern, may possibly be accountable for the quantum process to occur. Again, this is something that needs further research and refinement. All these data from neuroscience suggests that the mirror neuron activity on one hand and the quantum consciousness on the other support the pre-reflexive biosemiotically emergent process of the self as a naturally synechistic phenomenon. Semiotically, the self is an interpretant, as it is the case of iconic mimicry. The self is characterized as being non-deterministic, complex, and dynamic, as painted by the theory of quantum consciousness. As an interpretant, it reflects the object and at the same time is distinct and separate from it. But the self is also an interpreter as it generates the percept. As self, it is capable of establishing its identity, that is, its indexical relation to objects, affecting it, and generate a pool of symbols in response to an intrinsic movement to communicate. The relation of identity is an example of the generate secondness, one that is derived from indexicality. Interest in doing studies and research on Persian semiotics has been spreading in crescendo in the past 50 years or so. Being sign-savvy is a factor considered in cultural competency. Although the topic of self has more commonly taken the phenomenological or existential slant, here we attempt at a study of the self using the semiotic doctrine and principles of Charles Sanders Peirce. The more recent discovery of quantum consciousness support Peirce's theories in relation to the capacity of the brain to create semiotic relationships of thirdness that is characterized by synechism as well. Far from being a finished project, this paper hopes to usher studies that can delve into the topic with greater depth.